My husband stared at my fresh surgical scars and said his entire family of 13 was moving in tomorrow for a 2-week vacation. When I begged him to postpone because I could barely walk, he told me to stop acting like a victim and stay out of his mother's way. I nodded and kept quiet. What he did not know was that the luxury mansion we lived in was legally mine, and his impending betrayal was about to cost him everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic spouse a lesson they will never forget. I am Simone, 35 years old, and exactly 3 days ago, my spine was surgically fused back together. The doctors had been incredibly clear about my recovery. Strict bed rest, zero lifting, and absolutely no stress. I had built a highly successful user experience and interface design agency from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks for years to secure my future. That relentless grind was what bought our $2.5 million home in Buckhead, Atlanta, but it had also ruined my back. I was supposed to be healing in the quiet sanctuary of the home I paid for. Instead, I was standing in my grand foyer, strapped into a rigid medical brace with pain shooting down my legs like liquid fire, listening to my husband Jamal casually dismantle my piece. Jamal was 37 and worked as a mid-level regional sales manager, but you would never know it by looking at him. He wore custom suits, drove a leased luxury sedan, and paraded around Atlanta, playing the role of a wealthy tech investor. I allowed him to play this role. I kept my massive income a secret from his family, to protect his fragile ego, paying the mortgage and funding his lifestyle while letting him take the credit. It was a mistake I was currently paying for in agony. He stood across from me, checking his reflection in the entryway mirror, completely ignoring the tears of pain pooling in my eyes. He adjusted his collar and delivered the ultimatum without looking at me. My mother, Yvonne, and Kendrick are coming tomorrow. Ashley and the kids are coming too. In fact, all 13 of them are flying in for a 2-week family reunion. They need a vacation, and this house is huge, so it makes perfect sense. I gripped the edge of the console table, trying to keep my balance as a fresh wave of pain radiated from my spine. Jamal, I cannot host 13 people right now. I pleaded, my voice trembling. The doctor said I cannot even walk up the stairs unassisted for another week. Please just tell them to postpone until next month. I will even pay for their flights to be changed. Jamal finally turned to look at me, and the coldness in his eyes made my breath catch. He stepped closer, looking down at me, not with concern for his wife, who had just undergone major surgery, but with pure annoyance. "No one is waiting, Simone," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "My family deserves this vacation, and I am not going to disappoint them because you cannot handle a little discomfort. Ashley is going to handle all the hosting anyway. You just need to stay out of the way and let her do her thing. Do not embarrass me in front of my mother." The audacity of his words hit me harder than the physical pain. Do not embarrass him. The memory of my agency launch party flashed through my mind. It was the biggest professional milestone of my life, the night I officially secured my first $1 million corporate contract. I had rented out a beautiful venue downtown, expecting my husband to stand by my side and celebrate the culmination of my life work. But Jamal never showed up. He skipped my launch party entirely to drive to a sketchy dealership across town and bail his older brother Kendrick out of a predatory car loan. When I came home that night, exhausted and heartbroken, I confronted him. He had looked at me with that same cold arrogance he was wearing now, and told me that my little website hobby was not as important as family blood. He always belittled my work, because acknowledging my true success meant acknowledging his own mediocrity. He was a financial parasite feeding off my ambition while demanding I worship his bloodline. I stared at him now, feeling the heavy medical brace cutting into my ribs. "Your family has never respected me, Jamal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your mother hates the fact that I am independent, and Ashley treats me like I am invisible in my own home. I am physically broken right now. I cannot deal with Ashley acting like she owns the place and your mother criticizing everything I do." Jamal leaned in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, the cologne I bought him for his birthday. "If you look sick and miserable in front of Yvonne and ruin this trip for my family, There will be serious consequences for our marriage, he warned, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Just stay upstairs and keep your mouth shut. It is not that hard. He grabbed his keys from the bowl and walked out the front door, leaving me trembling in the foyer. I slowly made my way back to the downstairs guest bedroom, dragging my feet across the hardwood floors. I felt utterly defeated. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into his narrative, playing the supportive wife, while he played the big shot. Now, when I was at my most vulnerable, he was willing to sacrifice my physical recovery to maintain his fabricated image. I took my pain medication and fell into a restless sleep, dreading the arrival of his family the next day. But I did not even have 24 hours to prepare. The nightmare arrived early. I was woken up just 4 hours later by the sound of heavy car doors slamming and loud voices echoing through the driveway. I checked the clock on my nightstand. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. Confused and groggy from the medication, I pushed myself up from the bed, ignoring the sharp protest of my healing spine. I strapped the heavy brace back onto my torso and hobbled out of the bedroom, making my way slowly toward the front of the house. The heavy double doors of the foyer were already thrown wide open. 13 people were swarming my home like a plague of locusts. Children were screaming and sprinting across the pristine white rugs I had imported from Italy, their dirty shoes leaving visible marks. Suitcases were being dragged carelessly, scraping against the custom baseboards. And leading the pack was Yvonne, Jamal's mother. She walked in with her chin held high, her eyes immediately scanning my home with an expression of pure disdain. She wore her judgment like a badge of honor, finding flaws in everything I had worked so hard to build. Behind her was Kendrick, Jamal's perpetually unemployed older brother, carrying a cooler of cheap beer as if he were checking into a motel. And trailing right beside him was Ashley, his entitled white wife, pushing past everyone while complaining loudly about the southern humidity ruining her hair. Ashley ran a failing boutique that she constantly bragged about, using it as proof of her superior business acumen, despite the fact that it was bleeding money. I stood at the edge of the hallway, leaning heavily against the wall, trying to process the chaos. They were a day early. Jamal had not even warned me. But the real shock was not the premature invasion of my home. It was the man standing next to Jamal in the center of the foyer. He was not a relative. He was a middle-aged white man wearing a corporate polo shirt, holding a laser measuring tool and a thick clipboard. He was looking up at the high ceilings and making notes. I watched as Jamal shook the man's hand, smiling his charming salesman smile. "Thank you so much for coming out on such short notice," Jamal was saying, his voice carrying over the noise of his relatives. "We want to get the numbers finalized as quickly as possible." "No problem at all, Mr. Davis," the man replied, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "We appreciate you scheduling the urgent refinance evaluation so quickly. I will just need to take a look at the master suite and the backyard to finalize the appraisal report." The words hit me like a physical blow. Refinance evaluation, appraisal report. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrifying clarity, pushing past the fog of the painkillers. Jamal was not just bringing his family here for a free luxury vacation to boost his ego. He was preparing to leverage the equity of my home, the home I bought with my money, the home where he was not even on the deed. He was trying to pull cash out of my property, likely to fund whatever new doomed business venture Kendrick had dreamed up this time. I watched my husband guide the appraiser toward the kitchen, laughing with his brother, and completely ignoring the fact that his wife was standing in the shadows, broken and bleeding. He thought I was weak. He thought I was subdued by the surgery and the medication. He thought he could steal from me right under my nose while his family distracted me. In that exact moment, the tears of pain dried up and something cold and hard took their place. I realized that my marriage was not just toxic. It was a financial ambush. And if Jamal wanted to play a game of ruthless acquisition, he had no idea he was dealing with an expert. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat, as the sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. The rigid plastic of my medical back brace dug sharply into my ribs with every shallow breath I took. I had just undergone a major spinal fusion. The doctors had literally screwed my vertebrae together and told me that the slightest wrong move could cause permanent nerve damage. Yet here was my husband, perfectly groomed in his tailored suit and expensive cologne, standing in the grand foyer of the home I paid for, telling me to just stay out of the way. "You are unbelievable, Jamal," I whispered, gripping the edge of the mahogany console table to keep my legs from buckling under me. "I am your wife. I am supposed to be your priority." He rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exasperated sigh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Here we go again," he muttered, adjusting his designer watch. "You always make it about you, Simone. You are so entirely selfish. For once, I need you to think about my bloodline. My mother Yvonne has been stressed. My brother Kendrick has been going through a rough patch with his latest startup, and he needs a break. Ashley is stressed from running her boutique. They need this vacation. You never support my family." The sheer hypocrisy of his statement sent a wave of hot, blinding anger straight through my chest, temporarily masking the physical agony in my spine. "I never support your family," I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I support this entire family more than you could ever comprehend." He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You think because you run some little website hobby that you are the center of the universe. Family is real, Simone. Blood is real. Your little graphics company is just a distraction." His words were a deliberate, calculated strike at my life work. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a highly lucrative user experience and user interface tech agency. I employ 24 brilliant designers and developers. I secure multi-million-dollar contracts with national corporations. But to Jamal, my agency was just a little hobby. He intentionally belittled my career because acknowledging my success meant confronting his own massive financial failures. He was a mid-level regional sales manager who loved to parade around Atlanta pretending to be a wealthy tech investor. And I let him do it. I kept my income quiet around his mother Yvonne and his brother Kendrick because I wanted to protect his fragile male ego. But his accusation about me not supporting his family brought a very specific bitter memory rushing back to the surface. It was a memory that had permanently fractured the foundation of our marriage. I looked him dead in the eye despite the throbbing pain radiating down my legs. "Do you remember where you were the night I officially launched my agency?" "Jamal?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Do you remember where you were the night I secured the biggest corporate contract of my career and hosted a celebration downtown?" His jaw tightened. His eyes darted away for a fraction of a second before hardening into a glare. "That was 3 years ago, Simone. Let it go." "I will not let it go." I shot back, the memories playing vividly in my mind. I remembered standing in that sleek midtown venue wearing a stunning emerald dress surrounded by investors, my brilliant business partner Zuri, and my closest friends. I remembered staring at the heavy oak doors all night, waiting for my husband to walk through them and stand by my side. I remembered the humiliating pity in people's eyes when I had to make excuses for why the man I loved was absent on the most important night of my professional life. He was not working late. He was not stuck in traffic. While I was celebrating the launch of an agency that would eventually buy the $2.5 million house we were currently standing in, Jamal was standing in the fluorescent-lit office of a predatory car dealership. Kendrick, his chronically unemployed older brother, had decided he needed a brand new luxury sports car to impress women on the internet. Kendrick had terrible credit and signed a loan with an outrageous interest rate he could not afford. The dealership was about to report the car stolen because Kendrick defaulted on his very first payment. Instead of attending my launch party, Jamal drained $10,000 from our joint savings account to bail his brother out of a mess created by pure vanity. I remembered sitting in the back of my launch event, holding my phone, and reading the text message Jamal finally sent me at 11 o'clock at night. It read, "I had to handle a real family emergency. Your little website hobby is not as important as my own flesh and blood." I threw those exact words back at him now standing in our foyer. "You stole $10,000 of my hard-earned money to save Kendrick from his own stupidity," I reminded him fiercely. "You missed the defining moment of my career to coddle a 39-year-old man who refuses to get a job." Do not ever stand in my house and tell me I do not support your family. Jamal hated being reminded of the truth. His vanity could not handle the reflection of his own parasitic nature. His face twisted with rage, and he stepped squarely into my personal space looming over me. The charming facade he wore for the rest of the world completely vanished, leaving behind a cold, controlling bully. "Listen to me very carefully, Simone," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper. "My mother is a traditional woman. She expects a wife to be welcoming. She expects a wife to be up at dawn, cooking a full breakfast, hosting with a smile, and making her son look like the king of his castle. I am not going to let you ruin this trip with your terrible attitude." He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "If you come downstairs tomorrow wearing that ugly plastic medical cage, looking sick and miserable and embarrassing me in front of my mother, there will be severe consequences for our marriage. I am sick and tired of you acting like a martyr just because you had a minor medical procedure." A minor medical procedure. The surgeon had sliced open my back and fused my bones together with titanium screws. But to Jamal, it was just an inconvenience ruining his social calendar. Ashley and Kendrick will be taking the master suite tonight because Ashley has a sensitive back and needs the premium mattress. Jamal continued ruthlessly dictating the terms of my surrender. "You will move your things to the small downstairs office. You can set up a cot in there, out of sight, out of mind." I stared at him, feeling a chilling sense of clarity wash over my exhausted body. I realized in that precise moment that there was nothing left of my marriage worth saving. Jamal did not love me. He loved what I provided. He loved the luxury, the status, and the safety net my money afforded him and his entitled relatives. "Do we have an understanding, Simone?" he demanded, expecting submission. I looked at his polished shoes, his designer watch, and the arrogant tilt of his chin. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced my face to go completely blank. I slowly nodded my head, giving him the exact submissive reaction he craved. "We have an understanding, Jamal," I said softly. He smirked, clearly satisfied that he had put me in my place. He turned on his heel, grabbed his keys from the marble table, and walked out the front door without another word. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence of the foyer. But the silence did not last long. My mind was already racing, already calculating the exact trajectory of his impending destruction. I slowly turned and began the agonizing shuffle toward my downstairs office, completely unaware that the nightmare was going to escalate much faster than tomorrow morning. I barely had time to process the venom of his threats before my reality fractured even further. I had managed to shuffle into my small downstairs office and lower my aching body onto the narrow folding cot Jamal had set up for me. I was lying there trying to find a position that did not send white-hot spikes of agony through my fused vertebrae. The heavy pain medication was just starting to pull me under into a hazy sleep when the sound of heavy car doors slamming echoed through the front windows. I checked the digital clock on my desk. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. Jamal had explicitly told me his family was arriving tomorrow. The blare of the doorbell rang out, followed by the immediate chaotic sound of loud voices and luggage wheels scraping against the concrete porch. I strapped the rigid plastic medical brace back around my torso, biting my lip to keep from crying out. I hobbled into the hallway just as Jamal swung the front double doors open. 13 people flooded into my pristine home like a plague of locusts. Children sprinted past me, their sticky shoes leaving visible streaks on the custom-imported rugs I had meticulously picked out for the foyer. Yvonne walked in first, holding her designer knockoff handbag like she owned the place. Her eyes immediately scanned the entryway, judging every architectural detail. She made a loud comment to Kendrick about how the house felt too modern and sterile, lacking the warmth a proper wife should provide. Kendrick followed, hauling a massive cooler of cheap beer inside, bumping it carelessly against my freshly painted walls. Right beside him was Ashley, his entitled white wife, fanning herself and complaining loudly about the Atlanta humidity ruining her salon blowout. Ashley moved through my house with that specific brand of audacity, ignoring my presence entirely as she demanded to know which bedroom had the best natural lighting. But the true shock was not the premature invasion of my sanctuary. It was the man standing on the porch right behind my mother-in-law. He was a middle-aged white man wearing a corporate polo shirt, holding a laser measuring device and a thick clipboard. He did not look like a lost relative or a driver. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, hiding in the shadows to watch the scene unfold. Jamal stepped forward, shaking the man by the hand, with that practiced salesman charm he used to manipulate clients. "Thank you so much for coming out on such short notice," Jamal said, his voice carrying over the noise of his shouting nieces and nephews. "We want to get the numbers finalized as quickly as possible." The man tapped his pen against his clipboard. "No problem at all, Mr. Davis. We appreciate you scheduling the urgent refinance evaluation so quickly. I will just need to take a look at the master suite, the upgraded bathrooms, and the backyard footprint to finalize the appraisal report." The words hit me like a physical blow. Refinance evaluation, appraisal report. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrifying clarity, pushing past the fog of the painkillers. Jamal was not just bringing his family here for a free luxury vacation to boost his ego. He was preparing to leverage the equity of my home. The home I bought with my money from the profits of my tech agency. The home where his name was not even on the deed. My mind raced, going through the legal implications. Jamal could not authorize a refinance without my signature. He could not pull a single dime of equity out of this property unless he somehow managed to get his name added to the title. He would need a quitclaim deed signed by me to make that happen. Then I looked at the chaos unfolding in my foyer, and the sinister brilliance of his plan washed over me. He knew I was physically incapacitated. He knew the heavy narcotics the doctors prescribed made me drowsy and confused. He brought his entire loud, chaotic family here a day early to create the ultimate distraction, so I would not notice a bank appraiser walking through my halls, measuring the square footage of my assets. He planned to bury whatever legal documents he needed in a pile of medical paperwork and use the noise of 13 house guests to pressure me into signing them blindly. I watched my husband guide the appraiser toward the newly renovated kitchen, laughing with his brother Kendrick, and completely ignoring the fact that his wife was standing just feet away, broken and bleeding from major surgery. He thought I was weak. He thought I was subdued by the medical brace and the pills. He thought he could drain the equity of my life work to fund whatever new doomed business venture Kendrick had dreamed up this time. In that exact moment, the tears of physical pain dried up completely, and something cold and lethal took their place. I realized that my marriage was not just toxic. It was a calculated financial ambush. Jamal was looking at me not as a partner, but as a resource to be plundered for the benefit of his bloodline. He had deeply underestimated me. He only saw the compliant wife who kept her income quiet to stroke his pride. If Jamal wanted to play a game of ruthless corporate acquisition, he had no idea he was dealing with a chief executive who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts for breakfast. I held all the cards. I owned the house, the business, and the accounts. All I had to do was let him think his plan was working. I quietly turned back toward my office, locking the door behind me. I listened to the heavy footsteps of his family stomping on the floorboards above my head. Let them think I was hiding in defeat. Let Ashley claim my master bedroom, and let Yvonne critique my kitchen. I sat down at my desk, wincing as my spine throbbed, and reached for my secure encrypted laptop. I had a war to prepare for, and I was going to ensure that when the smoke cleared, not a single one of them would have a roof over their heads. My husband stared at my fresh surgical scars and casually announced that all 13 members of his family were moving into our house for the next 2 weeks. When I begged him to postpone the trip, because I could barely stand on my own 2 feet, he told me to stop acting like a victim and stay out of his mother's way. I nodded and kept quiet. What he did not know was that the luxury mansion we were standing in belonged entirely to me, and his impending betrayal was about to cost him everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic partner a lesson they will never forget. I am Simone. 35 years old, and exactly 3 days ago, doctors sliced my back open to fuse my lower spine together with titanium screws. I had built a highly successful user experience design agency from the ground up, working brutal 80-hour weeks to secure my future. That relentless grind bought our $2.5 million home in Buckhead, Atlanta, but it had also ruined my back. I was supposed to be healing in the quiet sanctuary of the home I paid for. Instead, I was standing in my grand foyer, strapped into a rigid medical brace with pain shooting down my legs like liquid fire, listening to my husband Jamal casually dismantle my piece. Jamal was 37 and worked as a mid-level regional sales manager, but you would never know it by looking at him. He wore custom suits, drove a leased luxury sedan, and paraded around Atlanta, playing the role of a wealthy tech investor. I allowed him to play this role. I kept my massive income a secret from his family to protect his fragile ego, paying the mortgage and funding his lifestyle while letting him take the credit. It was a mistake I was currently paying for in agony. He stood across from me, checking his reflection in the entryway mirror, completely ignoring the tears of pain pooling in my eyes. He adjusted his collar and delivered the ultimatum without even looking at me. My mother Yvonne and my brother Kendrick are coming tomorrow. Ashley and the kids are coming too. In fact, all 13 of them are flying in for a 2-week family reunion. They need a vacation, and this house is huge, so it makes perfect sense. I gripped the edge of the console table, trying to keep my balance as a fresh wave of pain radiated from my spine. Jamal. I cannot host 13 people right now, I pleaded, my voice trembling. The doctor said I cannot even walk up the stairs unassisted for another week. Please just tell them to postpone until next month. I will even pay for their flights to be changed. Jamal finally turned to look at me, and the coldness in his eyes made my breath catch. He stepped closer, looking down at me, not with concern for his wife, who had just undergone major surgery, but with pure annoyance. No one is waiting, Simone, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. My family deserves this vacation, and I am not going to disappoint them, because you cannot handle a little discomfort. Ashley is going to handle all the hosting anyway. You just need to stay out of the way and let her do her thing. Do not embarrass me in front of my mother. The sheer audacity of his words left me speechless. He was completely willing to sacrifice my physical recovery to play the generous patriarch for his family. And knowing his family, this was going to be a nightmare. His mother, Yvonne, was a deeply traditional woman who resented my independence and constantly criticized my lack of domestic skills. His older brother, Kendrick, was chronically unemployed, bouncing from one failed startup to another, while Jamal secretly funneled my money to him. And then there was Kendrick's wife, Ashley. As a white woman who had married into our African-American family, Ashley weaponized her fragility and entitlement to bulldoze her way through every social dynamic. She ran a failing boutique that I had secretly bailed out last year, yet she treated me like I was invisible in my own home. I looked at Jamal, my physical pain momentarily eclipsed by a sharp, rising anger. He was staring at me, expecting me to just bow my head and accept his ruling like I always did. For years, I had shrunk myself to fit into his narrative, playing the quiet, supportive wife, while he soaked up the admiration of his relatives. I had paid his debts, overlooked his vanity, and financed his delusions of grandeur. Are you seriously going to do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I am in agony, Jamal. If Ashley comes in here and tries to take over my house while your mother criticizes me, I do not think I can handle it. Jamal sighed heavily, as if my broken spine was a personal inconvenience to him. You are always so dramatic, Simone. Just stay in your lane. My mother has been stressed, and Kendrick needs a break from his business troubles. This house is meant to be enjoyed. If you cannot be a good hostess, then just stay upstairs and keep your mouth shut. It is not that hard. I stared at his polished shoes and his perfectly groomed beard, realizing how thoroughly I had been used. He did not love me. He loved the lifestyle I provided. He loved the status of living in a Buckhead mansion and the freedom to play the wealthy benefactor to his family. I took a deep breath, feeling the rigid plastic of my back brace digging into my ribs. I knew arguing with him would only drain the limited energy I had left. I also knew that pushing back right now would put him on the defensive before I could figure out exactly what his real motives were. Jamal never did anything just out of the goodness of his heart. There was always an angle. There was always a payoff he was chasing. Fine, I said softly, letting my head drop to feign submission. If they are coming, they are coming. Just please keep the noise down downstairs. He smirked, clearly satisfied that he had won the argument so easily. That is my good wife, he said, patting my shoulder absent-mindedly like I was the obedient dog. I have to go meet a client. Make sure the guest rooms are aired out before tomorrow. He walked out the front door without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone in the massive foyer. I slowly began the agonizing shuffle toward the kitchen, every step sending shockwaves of pain through my body. I felt utterly defeated, but beneath that defeat, a tiny spark of rebellion was finally catching fire. I had spent my entire marriage protecting Jamal from the reality of his own mediocrity. I had given him everything, and in return he had given me nothing but disrespect. I poured myself a glass of water and swallowed my pain medication, my mind racing with thoughts of the impending invasion. 13 people. 2 weeks. A mother-in-law who hated me. A brother-in-law who leeched off me. And a sister-in-law who completely disrespected me. It was a recipe for absolute disaster. But as I leaned against the cool marble of the kitchen counter, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive this family reunion. And by the time it was over, Jamal would wish he had never invited them into my home. I stood there, leaning against the cool marble of my kitchen counter, trying to catch my breath when Ashley marched in. She carried 3 massive plastic grocery bags, dropping them onto the pristine quartz island with a heavy thud. Without so much as a glance in my direction, she ripped open my custom stainless steel refrigerator and started pulling out my groceries. My organic pressed juices, my expensive imported cheeses, the fresh produce I had carefully ordered to help my body heal from surgery, all of it went flying into the trash bin. I asked her exactly what she thought she was doing in my kitchen. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder and huffed, saying her kids needed space for their frozen pizzas and sugary sodas. She said my health food was taking up too much room and that Jamal had explicitly told her to make herself at home. She looked at me with that signature weaponized fragility, a white woman married into a successful black family, acting like she owned the very air I breathed. She told me I needed to stop being so controlling and learn how to share with family. I tightened my grip on the counter, my spine screaming in agony, but my voice remained perfectly level. I told her it was fascinating to hear her lecture me about sharing when she had absolutely no problem taking my charity. Ashley froze, her hands hovering over a cheap box of frozen chicken nuggets. She turned around and asked me what I meant playing the victim perfectly. I looked her dead in the eye and told her about the $40,000. I told her I knew her little suburban boutique was facing total bankruptcy last October. I told her I knew about the wholesale vendors threatening to sue her and the eviction notices plastered on her storefront. She turned pale, stammering that Jamal had used his corporate bonus to save her business because family takes care of family. I laughed, a harsh, dry sound that echoed off the high ceilings. I told her Jamal did not get a bonus last year because his sales numbers were atrocious. I told her the $40,000 came directly from my agency profits. I funded her failing vanity project solely to keep Kendrick out of our guest room, and Jamal simply took the credit so she would not feel humiliated taking money from a black woman she clearly despised. I left her standing there, clutching her frozen processed food with her mouth hanging wide open. I turned my back on her and carefully navigated the long hallway until I reached the cramped downstairs office Jamal had relegated me to. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The room was small, dominated by my massive desk and my dual monitors. In the corner sat the flimsy folding cot Jamal had dragged in from the garage. I lowered myself onto the thin mattress, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper to keep from crying out. The physical pain was blinding, but I could not afford to let it cloud my judgment. I reached for my tablet on the desk. I had designed the smart home security network for this entire property myself. Jamal loved the fancy cameras because they made him feel like a tech mogul showing off to his friends, but he barely understood how to log into the basic user interface. I had full administrative access to every camera and audio feed in the house. I opened the encrypted application and pulled up the live high-definition feed from the kitchen. Ashley was no longer alone. Jamal and Yvonne had joined her. Yvonne was sitting at my kitchen island sipping my expensive red wine from a crystal goblet while Jamal paced the floor. Ashley looked frantic, pacing back and forth, telling Jamal what I had just revealed about the boutique bailout money. She demanded to know if it was true. Jamal waved his hand angrily, telling her to keep her voice down and ignoring her direct question. He poured himself a glass of my premium bourbon and told them both to relax. Yvonne chimed in, complaining that I was too arrogant and needed to be put in my place once and for all. She told Jamal he was the man of the house and needed to establish dominance over his disrespectful wife. Jamal smiled that sickeningly confident smile, taking a slow sip of his drink. He told his mother and his sister-in-law not to worry about my attitude. "Let her sleep," he said, his voice carrying crystal clear through my tablet speakers. "Let her stay locked in that office thinking she is punishing us by pouting. It actually works out perfectly for the timeline." He leaned against the counter and dropped the bomb. He told them he had slipped a quitclaim deed into the thick stack of medical insurance forms my surgeon required me to update. He knew I was heavily medicated and in too much pain to read the fine print. He said once I blindly signed that stack of papers, his name would legally go on the title of the house. He told Yvonne and Ashley that by next week the refinance would be fully approved and they could pull out $500,000 in cash to fund Kendrick's new logistics business. I sat in the dim light of my office staring at the screen as my husband outlined his plot to steal my home and my wealth right out from under me. He was going to use my physical pain and my prescription medication against me to hijack my assets for his unemployed brother. The sheer evil of his strategy washed over me completely, extinguishing any remaining shred of love I had for the man. I turned off the tablet screen and placed it quietly on the desk. Jamal thought he was playing chess with a naive, sick wife. He had no idea he was playing a lethal game with a woman who built complex digital empires for a living. I took a deep breath, letting cold, ruthless calculation take over. I was going to let him bring me those papers, and then I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life. My husband looked at the fresh surgical staples running down my spine and casually announced that 13 of his relatives were moving into my house tomorrow for a 2-week vacation. When I begged him to postpone because I could barely stand on my own 2 feet, he told me to stop playing the victim and stay out of his mother's way. I nodded and kept quiet. What he did not know was that the luxury Atlanta mansion we were standing in belonged entirely to me, and his impending betrayal was about to cost him everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic partner a lesson they will never forget. I am Imani, 35 years old, and exactly 3 days ago, doctors sliced my back open to fuse my lower spine together with titanium screws. I had built a highly successful user experience design agency from the ground up, working brutal 80-hour weeks to secure my future. That relentless grind bought our $2.5 million home in Buckhead, Atlanta, but it had also ruined my back. I was supposed to be healing in the quiet sanctuary of the home I paid for. Instead, I was standing in my grand foyer, strapped into a rigid medical brace with pain shooting down my legs like liquid fire, listening to my husband Andre casually dismantle my piece. Andre was 37 and worked as a mid-level regional sales manager, but you would never know it by looking at him. He wore custom suits, drove a leased luxury sedan, and paraded around Atlanta playing the role of a wealthy tech investor. I allowed him to play this role. I kept my massive income a secret from his family to protect his fragile ego, paying the mortgage and funding his lifestyle while letting him take the credit. It was a mistake I was currently paying for in agony. He stood across from me, checking his reflection in the entryway mirror, completely ignoring the tears of pain pooling in my eyes. He adjusted his collar and delivered the ultimatum without even looking at me. "My mother Brenda and my brother Dion are coming tomorrow. Chloe and the kids are coming too. In fact, all 13 of them are flying in for a 2-week family reunion. They need a vacation, and this house is huge, so it makes perfect sense." I gripped the edge of the console table, trying to keep my balance as a fresh wave of pain radiated from my spine. "Andre, I cannot host 13 people right now. I pleaded, my voice trembling. The doctor said I cannot even walk up the stairs unassisted for another week. Please just tell them to postpone until next month. I will even pay for their flights to be changed. Andre finally turned to look at me, and the coldness in his eyes made my breath catch. He stepped closer, looking down at me, not with concern for his wife who had just undergone major surgery, but with pure annoyance. No one is waiting, Amani, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. My family deserves this vacation, and I am not going to disappoint them because you cannot handle a little discomfort. Chloe is going to handle all the hosting anyway. You just need to stay out of the way and let her do her thing. Do not embarrass me in front of my mother. The sheer audacity of his words left me speechless. He was completely willing to sacrifice my physical recovery to play the generous patriarch for his family. And knowing his family, this was going to be a nightmare. His mother, Brenda, was a deeply traditional woman who resented my independence and constantly criticized my lack of domestic skills. His older brother, Dayon, was chronically unemployed, bouncing from one failed startup to another, while Andre secretly funneled my money to him. And then there was Dion's wife, Chloe. As a white woman who had married into our African-American family, Chloe weaponized her fragility and entitlement to bulldoze her way through every social dynamic. She ran a failing boutique that I had secretly bailed out last year, yet she treated me like I was invisible in my own home. I looked at Andre, my physical pain momentarily eclipsed by a sharp, rising anger. He was staring at me, expecting me to just bow my head and accept his ruling like I always did. For years, I had shrunk myself to fit into his narrative, playing the quiet, supportive wife, while he soaked up the admiration of his relatives. I had paid his debts, overlooked his vanity, and financed his delusions of grandeur. Are you seriously going to do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I am in agony. Andre, if Chloe comes in here and tries to take over my house while your mother criticizes me, I do not think I can handle it. Andre sighed heavily, as if my broken spine was a personal inconvenience to him. You are always so dramatic, Amani. Just stay in your lane. My mother has been stressed, and Dayon needs a break from his business troubles. This house is meant to be enjoyed. If you cannot be a good hostess, then just stay upstairs and keep your mouth shut. It is not that hard. I stared at his polished shoes and his perfectly groomed beard, realizing how thoroughly I had been used. He did not love me. He loved the lifestyle I provided. He loved the status of living in a Buckhead mansion and the freedom to play the wealthy benefactor to his family. I took a deep breath, feeling the rigid plastic of my back brace digging into my ribs. I knew arguing with him would only drain the limited energy I had left. I also knew that pushing back right now would put him on the defensive before I could figure out exactly what his real motives were. Andre never did anything just out of the goodness of his heart. There was always an angle. There was always a payoff he was chasing. Fine, I said softly, letting my head drop to feign submission. If they are coming, they are coming. Just please keep the noise down downstairs. He smirked, clearly satisfied that he had won the argument so easily. That is my good wife, he said, patting my shoulder absent-mindedly like I was an obedient dog. I have to go meet a client. Make sure the guest rooms are aired out before tomorrow. He walked out the front door without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone in the massive foyer. I slowly began the agonizing shuffle toward the kitchen, every step sending shockwaves of pain through my body. I felt utterly defeated, but beneath that defeat, a tiny spark of rebellion was finally catching fire. I had spent my entire marriage protecting Andre from the reality of his own mediocrity. I had given him everything, and in return, he had given me nothing but disrespect. I poured myself a glass of water and swallowed my pain medication, my mind racing with thoughts of the impending invasion. 13 people. 2 weeks. A mother-in-law who hated me, a brother-in-law who leached off me, and a sister-in-law who completely disrespected me. It was a recipe for absolute disaster. But as I leaned against the cool marble of the kitchen counter, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive this family reunion, and by the time it was over, Andre would wish he had never invited them into my home. I quickly tapped the keyboard shortcut to lock my encrypted workstation and shoved my heavy laptop under the desk out of sight. The sound of solid footsteps approaching down the hardwood hallway signaled that my husband was making his move. I carefully lowered myself back onto the flimsy folding cot, groaning as my inflamed spinal nerves protested the awkward movement. I pulled the thin cotton blanket up to my chin, letting my eyes droop half shut, just as the brass handle of the office door turned. Jamal walked in carrying a polished silver tray. On it sat a tall glass of ice water, my orange prescription bottles, and a thick stack of stapled documents resting on a leather clipboard. He was wearing a fresh linen shirt smelling of bright citrus, an expensive mint, looking every bit the devoted caretaker. It was a flawless performance worthy of an award. The engine of his leased luxury sedan was already idling in the driveway. I could hear his mother Yvonne complaining loudly through the open front windows about the Atlanta heat and how long it was taking him to grab a simple signature. "Hey, baby," he whispered, keeping his voice unnaturally soft and soothing. "I brought your next dose of painkillers. I know you are hurting right now, and I want you to be comfortable." I let out a ragged breath, forcing my eyelids to flutter as if fighting a heavy chemical fog. "Thank you," I murmured, slurring the syllables just enough to sound heavily medicated. "My back is killing me, Jamal. The pills make my head spin so fast I can barely see straight." He sat on the edge of the cot, feigning a sympathetic smile. "I know, sweetheart," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "You just need to rest. I am going to make sure nobody bothers you down here. In fact, I am about to take my mother to that luxury spa downtown, so you will have the entire house to yourself for a few hours. Ashley is taking the kids to the country club pool." Of course he was taking Yvonne to a luxury spa. I had just seen the downloaded credit card statements on my hidden network drive. He was funding his mother's deep tissue massages using a high-interest card he opened behind my back. He was drowning in consumer debt trying to buy the respect of a woman who raised him to believe he was a king while contributing absolutely nothing to the kingdom. He handed me 2 heavy narcotic pills and the glass of ice water. I placed the white pills in my mouth, taking a large gulp of water, but expertly tucked the capsules deep into my cheek. I swallowed the water loudly, then coughed, leaning back against the pillow, as if the simple effort of drinking had completely drained my energy. Jamal watched me closely, his dark eyes scanning my face for any sign of lucidity or resistance. Satisfied that I was sufficiently drugged and compliant, he casually slid the heavy leather clipboard onto my lap. "Listen, baby, I hate to bother you with paperwork right now, but the surgeon's office sent over some urgent insurance updates." He lied, his voice smooth and practiced. "They need your signature on a few pages to process the out-of-network claims before the end of the billing cycle today. It is just standard bureaucracy, but they are threatening to deny the coverage if we do not sign." I stared at the thick stack of papers, narrowing my eyes as if trying desperately to focus on the text. The top page was indeed a standard medical release form with the hospital logo, but I knew exactly what he had buried underneath it. I let out a long, dramatic sigh, letting my head loll slightly to the side, resting against the wall. "Can I just read it tomorrow, Jamal?" I whined, injecting my voice with a pathetic, needy tone. "The words are all blurry right now. I cannot focus on the fine print. I just want to go to sleep." A quick flash of irritation crossed his face, quickly masked by a patronizing chuckle. He leaned over me, placing one large hand firmly on my shoulder in a gesture that was designed to look comforting but felt entirely restrictive. "Simone, you know how these medical billing departments are?" He insisted, his tone taking on that familiar, condescending edge he used when he wanted to make me feel small. "If we miss the deadline, we are going to be on the hook for thousands of dollars in surgical fees. I already read through everything for you. It is completely standard." I highlighted the signature lines so you do not even have to think about it. Just sign them and you can sleep all afternoon. "My mother is waiting in the driveway and I cannot keep her waiting in this brutal heat." I put up a weak resistance, shaking my head slowly from side to side. "Jamal, I do not like signing things I have not read." I slurred, letting my hands tremble visibly as I touched the cold metal clip of the board. "You know my agency lawyers always tell me to review contracts before putting my name on anything." He scoffed, dismissing my brilliant corporate legal team with a wave of his hand. This is not one of your little web design contracts, Simone. This is our family health insurance. I am your husband. I handle the complex household logistics while you play on your computer. Do you really think I would put something in front of you that would hurt our family? The psychological manipulation was breathtaking to witness. He was using his fabricated role as the head of the household to steamroll his highly successful wife while she was physically vulnerable. He wanted me to feel utterly dependent on his guidance. He needed to feel completely dominant in this moment to validate his fragile manhood and secure his unearned wealth. And I looked up at him, letting a single tear slip down my cheek, playing the role of the exhausted, obedient spouse to absolute perfection. "Okay, Jamal," I whispered, letting my voice break with manufactured vulnerability. "I trust you. You always take care of us." His chest visibly puffed out with pride. His vanity was his absolute greatest weakness, and I was feeding it massive amounts of oxygen. He reached into his tailored shirt pocket and pulled out a heavy gold pen, offering it to me, with a victorious smirk playing on his lips. I looked at his fancy pen and then weakly shook my head. "No," I murmured, pointing a trembling finger toward my massive oak desk a few feet away across the room. "I want to use my favorite pen. The blue one in my top drawer. It brings me good luck." Jamal rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by the childish delay, but entirely unwilling to blow his cover over a simple writing instrument. He stood up and walked over to my desk, pulling open the top drawer with a heavy sigh. He had absolutely no idea that his arrogance had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his entire life. Jamal walked back over to the cot holding my favorite blue pen. It looked like a standard premium gel pen with a sleek metallic barrel. He had absolutely no idea that it was a highly specialized architectural drafting tool I imported specifically for my early-stage wireframe sessions. The ink flows onto the paper in a vibrant solid blue, but it is chemically designed to completely evaporate when exposed to standard room temperature air for 24 hours. It leaves zero residue behind. No indentation, no smudges, just a perfectly blank piece of paper. I took the pen from his outstretched hand, letting my fingers shake just enough to sell the performance. "Where do you need me to sign, Jamal?" I asked, my voice a weak, pathetic whisper. He eagerly leaned over, tapping a manicured fingernail against the bottom of the first page. "Just right here, baby. And then on the next 3 pages. Do not worry about the small text. I have got everything handled for us." I dragged the nib of the pen across the bottom of the medical insurance forms. I made sure to let out a small groan of pain as I shifted my weight, leaning heavily into the pillow. Then he flipped the page, revealing the quitclaim deed. The legal document that would surrender half the equity of my $2.5 million home and place his name right next to mine on the title. I did not hesitate. I scrawled my signature right on the dotted line. Jamal practically snatched the heavy leather clipboard off my lap the second the pen lifted from the paper. I watched his dark eyes scan the ink. A flash of pure, unadulterated greed lit up his face. He was looking at that signature like he had just won the lottery. In his mind, he was already pulling out $500,000 to fund his brother Kendrick's non-existent business ventures and solidifying his fake status as the wealthy provider for his mother, Yvonne. "Thank you, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with fake affection as he tucked the clipboard firmly under his arm. "You just get some sleep now. I am going to take my mother to the spa so she can unwind. Ashley is going to take the kids to the pool. The house will be nice and quiet for you." He leaned down and pressed a cold kiss to my forehead. I closed my eyes, pretending to drift off right then and there. I listened to his expensive leather shoes tapping against the hardwood as he walked to the office door. The door clicked shut. Then I heard a sound that sent a chilling wave of clarity straight down my spine. The heavy metallic thud of the exterior deadbolt sliding into place. He locked the door. My own husband locked me inside my cramped downstairs office to ensure I stayed exactly where he put me while he went out to play the generous billionaire with my money. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade completely down the hall. I waited until I heard the heavy front doors open and close. I waited until I heard the engine of his leased luxury sedan roar to life in the driveway and pull away down the street. The moment the house grew relatively quiet, The exhausted, groggy wife vanished completely. I opened my eyes and sat up, right ignoring the blinding stab of pain in my lower back. My mind was razor sharp. The heavy narcotics were definitely in my system, but my adrenaline was running so high it completely neutralized the mental fog. I reached under my thin mattress and pulled out my actual smartphone, not the decoy business phone I had left sitting on the desk. I opened my encrypted messaging application and found my thread with Elijah. Elijah was a shark in a tailored suit. He was the ruthless corporate attorney who had helped me structure my tech agency and legally insulate my personal assets long before Jamal started showing his true colors. Elijah did not play games, and he did not lose. I typed out the message with steady fingers. The trap is set. He took the bait and the forged documents. The ink will vanish by tomorrow morning, leaving him with a stack of blank paper. Prepare the corporate trust documents and finalize the asset transfers right now. And Elijah send the private security team on Friday. Elijah replied almost instantly. Consider it done, Simone. Are you safe in the house with those people? I replied that I was locked in, but I was exactly where I need to be. I set the phone down and looked around the dim, cramped office. Jamal thought he was punishing me by putting me in here. He thought bringing 13 loud, disrespectful relatives into my home would break my spirit and force my compliance. But he had just given me the absolute perfect cover. While they were busy upstairs ruining my custom hardwood floors, drinking my expensive wine, and treating my home like a free resort, I was sitting in my war room. Over the next few days, I was going to methodically sever every single financial artery keeping his fake lifestyle afloat. I was going to drain the joint accounts, remove my name as the guarantor on his precious car lease, and lock down every dime of my agency profits. I was going to watch him parade around my house playing the king while the entire castle silently crumbled to ash around him. Let Ashley sleep in my imported Egyptian cotton sheets. Let Kendrick draft his fake business plans. Let Yvonne brag to her church friends about her highly successful son. They had absolutely no idea that their luxury vacation was actually a countdown timer. Friday was coming, and I was going to make sure that when the clock ran out, they would leave with nothing but the clothes on their backs. By day 5 of the family reunion, my $2.5 million home had been transformed into an absolute nightmare. I spent the majority of my time confined to the cramped downstairs office, playing the role of the defeated and heavily medicated wife. Through the thin walls, I could hear the constant stomping of feet, the blaring television, and the sound of my expensive crystal glassware clinking as Andre entertained his relatives. He was playing the wealthy patriarch, perfectly funding lavish dinners and daily excursions using credit cards he could not afford to pay off. I endured the physical agony of my healing spine and the mental exhaustion of listening to them disrespect my property because I knew the trap was already set. Friday was approaching quickly, and I just needed to survive until Elijah and the security team arrived. But Andre and his family were not content with merely taking over my house. They needed to actively humiliate me to fully satisfy their egos. It happened on Thursday afternoon. Andre had unlocked the office door that morning to toss a lukewarm cup of coffee on my desk before leaving to play golf with his brother Dayon. I was sitting on the edge of the folding cot doing my best to stretch my legs without pulling the surgical staples in my lower back. The heavy oak door suddenly swung wide open. Brenda marched into the room, her chin held high and her eyes sweeping over me with sheer disgust. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized immediately because it belonged to me. She had raided my master bedroom closet without a second thought. Standing right behind her was Chloe holding a massive goblet filled to the brim with my most expensive vintage red wine. Chloe looked completely at ease sipping stolen wine in the middle of the afternoon while her unattended children destroyed my living room furniture. Brenda stood over me, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked down at the rigid plastic medical brace strapped around my torso and let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "You have been laying around down here for 5 days, Amani," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "It is time for you to get up and do your duties. My son has been working himself to the bone trying to provide for this family and entertain us while you sit in here being absolutely useless. I expect a massive traditional Southern dinner on the table by 6 o'clock tonight." I want fried chicken, candied yams, collard greens, and baked macaroni and cheese. I stared at my mother-in-law, trying to process the sheer audacity of her demand. I had just undergone spinal fusion surgery. My doctors had explicitly forbidden me from standing for more than 15 minutes at a time. Yet here she was demanding I stand over a hot stove for hours to cook a feast for 13 people just to prove my worth as a wife. I cannot do that, Brenda, I said, keeping my voice calm and completely flat. I am physically incapable of cooking right now. My spine is healing. I cannot stand in the kitchen. Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes heavenward as if asking for patience. A real wife does not let her husband starve while she lays around feeling sorry for herself, she snapped. You are a terrible hostess, and an even worse partner to my son. Andre deserves a woman who knows how to cultivate domestic warmth. You are too busy playing on your computer to care about your own family. Chloe stepped forward, a smug smile plastered across her face. She took a slow sip of the red wine and looked at me with that weaponized innocence she always used to mask her cruelty. Honestly, Imani, you are being incredibly selfish, Chloe chimed in. Andre is paying for this huge, beautiful house and taking care of all of us. The absolute least you could do is make sure we have a hot, home-cooked meal. You are acting like a spoiled brat just because your back hurts a little bit. I looked at Chloe, feeling a cold, lethal anger settling deep in my chest. This white woman whose failing suburban boutique was secretly bailed out by my agency profits was standing in my mansion, drinking my wine and calling me spoiled. I wanted to scream the truth at her. I wanted to tell her that she was standing on my property and that her entire fake wealthy lifestyle was funded by my hard work. But I bit my tongue, tasting blood. I needed to maintain the facade just a little bit longer. I will not be cooking tonight, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You both need to leave my office and close the door. Chloe narrowed her eyes, her fake smile vanishing completely. She did not like being told what to do by a black woman she perceived as inferior. She noticed my secondary work laptop sitting open on the edge of the large mahogany desk. It was an expensive machine I used for rendering heavy graphic files. You know, Imani, Chloe said, taking a step closer to the desk. Andre told us all about your little website hobby. He said you spend way too much time staring at screens instead of taking care of your household. Maybe you need a break from the digital world so you can focus on reality. Before I could even process what she was doing, Chloe tilted her wrist. She deliberately poured the entire goblet of dark red wine directly onto the open keyboard of my laptop. The liquid splashed across the keys and instantly seeped into the expensive hardware. The screen flickered wildly for a fraction of a second before short-circuiting completely and going pitch black. A small hiss of frying electronics echoed in the quiet room. Chloe gasped, bringing her empty hand up to her mouth in a perfect display of fake shock. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, she said, her tone dripping with vicious sarcasm. My hand just slipped. It was a complete accident. I guess you will just have to go to the kitchen and cook now that your little computer is broken. Brenda let out a sharp, cruel laugh, turning on her heel and walking out of the room. Chloe gave me one last triumphant smirk before following her mother-in-law, shutting the office door behind them. I sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the ruined laptop dripping dark red wine onto the floorboards. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not panic. Chloe thought she had just destroyed my business and put me in my place. She thought she had established dominance in my house. What she did not know was that I was a senior technology executive. Every single file, asset, and contract on that machine was heavily encrypted and backed up to a secure remote cloud server in real time. The laptop was just a piece of hardware easily replaced, but her actions had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They were not just taking advantage of my hospitality anymore. They were actively trying to destroy my livelihood. I carefully stood up, fighting through the blinding pain in my back, and reached for my primary secured tablet hidden under the mattress. The time for playing defense was over. I opened my encrypted banking application and began the process of severing my finances. I was going to drain every joint account and leave Andre with nothing but the massive debt he had built trying to impress these parasites. I pulled my primary tablet from beneath the thin mattress, the cool metal a grounding force against the burning pain in my spine. Ashley thought a spilled glass of wine was enough to destroy my agency. She had no idea that hardware was just a shell. I tapped my secure access code and watched the system sync flawlessly with my encrypted cloud server. Every contract, every wireframe, every financial document was perfectly safe. I opened my encrypted messaging application and initiated a secure video call with my business partner, Zuri. She picked up on the first ring. Zuri was sitting in our sleek downtown office looking sharp in a tailored blazer, her braids pulled back into a high bun. We had built this agency from the ground up, navigating boardrooms filled with people who constantly underestimated two young African American women. We had fought too hard for our empire to let a parasitic husband and his entitled sister-in-law tear it down. Zuri took one look at my face and the dripping laptop in the background and immediately knew something had crossed the line. I gave her the brief clinical rundown of what Ashley and Yvonne had just done, and Jamal's plot with the quitclaim deed. Zuri did not gasp or offer empty sympathy. She is a woman who operates on pure strategy and execution, just like I do. Her expression turned lethal, her eyes narrowing as she pulled her own keyboard closer. She told me to say the word, and she would shut down every financial pipeline that connected our agency to my personal joint accounts. I gave her the green light without a single second of hesitation. While Zuri handled the corporate firewall on her end, I went to work on the domestic front. I logged into the primary banking portal I shared with Jamal. The screen loaded displaying the heavy six-figure balance I maintained to ensure our household ran smoothly. Jamal treated this account like a magical wishing well. He never questioned how it kept replenishing itself while he barely brought in enough regional sales commission to cover the monthly payments on his custom-tailored suits. He simply swiped the debit card and lived in a delusion of grandeur. With a few swift keystrokes, I initiated a wire transfer. I moved every single dime of my agency profits out of that joint account and directly into a newly formed airtight limited liability company that Elijah had set up for me yesterday. The joint account balance dropped from a very comfortable safety net down to exactly $14.32. I left just enough to cover his monthly streaming subscriptions. Next, I tackled his liabilities. Jamal loved parading around Atlanta in his leased luxury sedan, a car he convinced his mother he bought straight off the lot with cash. The reality was that his credit score was so abysmal from funding Kendrick's endlessly failed ventures that the dealership had required a co-signer with exceptional credit to approve the lease. Me. I pulled up the automotive financing portal. Thanks to a specific escape clause Elijah had ruthlessly drafted into my prenuptial agreement 8 years ago, I was legally permitted to withdraw my guarantor status in the event of documented financial deception or marital separation. I submitted the forms digitally, severing my legal liability. By early next week, the dealership would demand Jamal return the vehicle or produce a new guarantor. I did not stop there. I pulled up the 3 high-limit premium credit cards he had opened as authorized user accounts under my primary credit profile. These were the cards he was currently using to fund this massive family reunion. These were the cards paying for Yvonne's luxury spa days and Kendrick's imported cigars. Click. Access revoked. Click. Cards deactivated. Click. Financial lifeline permanently severed. I sat back on the cot, my breathing steady despite the throes of my physical recovery. Through the locked door of my office, I could hear the booming bass of the living room television and the loud, obnoxious laughter of Jamal and Kendrick. They were popping bottles of champagne, celebrating their brilliant plot to steal my equity. They were treating my home like a conquered territory, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just dropped a financial guillotine on their entire operation. I switched the tablet back to the home's security camera feed. I watched Jamal swagger into the kitchen, pulling another bottle of my imported wine from the reserve fridge. He looked so incredibly smug, so proud of his ability to manipulate the women in his life. He was bragging to his mother about the massive seafood feast he was going to cater for them tomorrow night using the exact credit card I had just permanently disabled. I let a small, sharp smile touch my lips. Jamal had built his entire identity on the illusion of being a powerful, providing patriarch. He demanded submission and domestic perfection from me while hiding cowardly behind my paycheck. He propped up Ashley's failing boutique to look like a savior, but tried to drown my actual thriving business in red wine. He wanted to play the undisputed king, but he had completely forgotten who actually owned the castle. I carefully slid the tablet back under my mattress and reached for my water glass. The pain in my back was still a roaring fire, but it was completely eclipsed by the profound icy satisfaction of taking back my power. Let them feast tonight. Let them drink the wine and trample the rugs and scheme about my property. They were living on borrowed time. Friday was coming, and I was going to ensure their eviction was the most spectacular event this family had ever witnessed. I needed to use the restroom down the hall. I slowly pushed myself off the cot, adjusting the rigid straps of my medical brace. The pain medication was wearing off, leaving a sharp throbbing ache at the base of my spine, but my mind was crystal clear. I unlocked the heavy oak door of my office and shuffled into the hallway. Yvonne was standing right outside, admiring a framed photograph of Jamal from his college graduation. She turned her head as I approached, her eyes instantly narrowing with that familiar, deep-seated resentment she reserved just for me. She looked me up and down, taking in my swollen face and my cumbersome medical gear. "You know, Simone," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet corridor. "Jamal is a strong, handsome man with a bright future. He comes from a proud lineage. It is an absolute shame you have not been able to give him a child to carry on his legacy. A man works as hard as my son does, providing for a household like this, and his wife cannot even give him a proper heir. It makes a mother wonder what exactly he is getting out of this marriage." I stopped walking. The sheer cruelty of her weaponizing my lack of children while I was physically broken from surgery was breathtaking. In the past, I would have lowered my eyes and walked away, swallowing the lump in my throat to keep the peace. But the old Simone was dead. I looked straight into my mother-in-law's eyes, my posture straightening despite the burning agony in my back. "I will tell you exactly what he gets out of this marriage, Yvonne," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "He gets a free ride, and so do you." She gasped, clutching the pearl necklace resting against her chest. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she sputtered. "My son takes care of everything. He even paid for my total knee replacement 2 years ago when my own insurance denied the claim. He is a provider." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Is that what he told you?" I asked, stepping just a fraction closer. "Did he tell you he used his big corporate bonus to pay for your surgery?" "Yvonne, that was a $60,000 out-of-pocket medical expense. Jamal did not have $60 in his savings account at the time. I paid for your new knee. I used my premium corporate health insurance and my own agency profits to cover every single dime of your physical therapy and your private hospital suite. Your son simply took the credit because his ego could not handle the fact that his wife had to save his mother's ability to walk." Yvonne opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her face drained of all color as the mathematical reality of my statement crashed into her delusions. She knew deep down that Jamal never had that kind of money. I did not wait for her to recover. I turned my back on her and walked into the bathroom, locking the door. I had shattered her illusion of her perfect son, and I knew the cracks would only spread from there. Later that night, the house finally settled into a quiet hum. The children were asleep upstairs, and Ashley had retreated to my master bedroom. I sat in the dark of my home office, staring at the glowing monitors on my desk. I pulled up the live security feed. Jamal and his brother Kendrick were sitting out on my custom stone patio, lounging in my expensive teak furniture. They were smoking imported cigars and drinking the last of my top-shelf whiskey. I watched them laugh and gesture wildly, celebrating their impending wealth. I reached over and tapped the screen, activating the high-definition outdoor audio feed I had installed for security purposes. The microphones were incredibly sensitive, picking up the ambient sound of the crickets and the clinking of their glasses. Kendrick stood up, stretching his arms. "I'm going to grab another bottle from the reserve fridge," he said, slurring his words slightly. He stumbled back into the house, leaving Jamal alone on the patio. The second the sliding glass door clicked shut, Jamal's entire demeanor changed. He quickly pulled his smartphone from his tailored slacks and dialed a number. He held the phone to his ear, taking a nervous drag of his cigar. I turned the volume up on my speakers, leaning in close. "Hey, baby," Jamal said, his voice dropping into that smooth, intimate register he used to use on me years ago. "I know it is late. I just had to hear your voice." A high-pitched female voice responded through the phone receiver. The microphone picked it up perfectly. It was a younger woman, sounding irritated and impatient. "You said you would call me hours ago, Jamal. I am tired of waiting around. You promised me things were going to change." "They are changing, baby, I swear," Jamal pleaded desperately. "You just have to give me a few more days. The plan is working perfectly. Simone is completely out of it. She is hopped up on painkillers and hiding in the downstairs office. She signed the paperwork this afternoon, just like I told you she would." My blood ran ice cold. I stared at the screen, recording every single second of the audio feed directly to my encrypted cloud drive. "Are you sure she did not read it?" the woman asked, her voice whining. "I cannot keep sneaking around, Jamal. I want to be in the open. I want the lifestyle you promised me." "You are going to have it all," Jamal promised, taking another drag of his cigar. "As soon as this refinance clears, my name goes on the deed. I am pulling the cash out, and then I am serving her with divorce papers. I have my lawyer drafting them right now to claim half of her web design business, too. With her medical condition, she will not have the energy to fight me in court. I am going to push her completely out." He laughed, a cruel, dark sound that made my stomach turn. "Just pack your bags, baby," he told his mistress. "By next month, this $2.5 million mansion is going to be all ours. You will be the new lady of the house, just like you deserve." I sat in the dark office, my hands perfectly still, my breathing slow and measured. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Jamal was not just a parasite trying to fund his brother's business. He was a predator plotting to throw his disabled wife out onto the street so he could move his young mistress into the home I built with my own two hands. He wanted to strip me of my assets, my business, and my dignity. I ended the recording and saved the audio file under a secure locked folder. I did not shed a single tear. There was no sadness left in my body. It had been entirely consumed by a brilliant, blinding rage. I picked up my phone and sent one more message to my lawyer, Elijah. "Add adultery and premeditated fraud to the filing," I typed. "I have the audio confession. We are not just taking the house and the business. We are going to leave him with absolutely nothing. Let him enjoy his cigar tonight. By Friday, he will not even be able to afford the match to light it." The heavy bass from the living room sound system vibrated through the ceiling right above my head. It was Friday evening. 5 days of enduring the invasion had finally culminated in this exact moment. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the folding cot in my dim office. The heavy medical brace was strapped tightly around my torso, holding my healing spine in place. The physical pain was a constant dull roar, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Through the locked oak door, I could hear the clinking of my fine crystal and the booming, obnoxious laughter of my husband. Jamal was throwing his ultimate victory party. He called it a family success dinner. The irony was absolutely staggering. The rich smell of roasted garlic and seared prime rib wafted through the ventilation vents, mocking my empty stomach. I had barely eaten all week, relying on protein shakes and bottled water I kept stashed in my desk drawers. But hunger was a minor inconvenience compared to the feast of retribution I was about to consume. I reached for my secured tablet and pulled up the live camera feeds for the main floor. The visual was enough to make my blood boil, but I watched it with the cold detachment of a general surveying a battlefield. All 13 of his relatives were packed into my formal dining room. They were dressed to the nines, treating my $2.5 million mansion like they had already inherited it. Yvonne sat at the head of the imported marble table wearing a glittering evening gown. She was holding court, talking loudly about how proud she was of her son. She genuinely believed Jamal was the sole provider, the wealthy tech investor who had graciously allowed his sickly, burdensome wife to rest downstairs while the real family celebrated his triumphs. The 13 relatives had completely taken over the space. Through the cameras, I could see the younger children running around the living room with greasy hands touching the custom upholstery I had waited 6 months to have delivered from Europe. None of the adults bothered to correct them. They simply let the children run wild, assuming the invisible maid locked in the office would eventually clean up the mess. Kendrick was pacing around the kitchen island, wearing a custom suit he definitely could not afford. He was swirling a glass of my top-shelf bourbon and bragging to his cousins about the new logistics business he was launching next week. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that his business capital was supposed to come from a fraudulent quitclaim deed that was currently sitting as a completely blank piece of paper in Jamal's briefcase. And then there was Ashley. I zoomed the camera in on my sister-in-law, and a cold smile touched my lips. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders. I recognized it instantly because I had purchased it in Paris 2 years ago. She had raided my master bedroom closet without a single ounce of hesitation. She was standing next to the massive catered buffet spread filling her plate with expensive cuts of meat and gourmet sides. Jamal had ordered the catering from one of the most exclusive restaurants in Atlanta. I knew exactly how he paid for it. After I deactivated his premium credit cards earlier this week, he had panicked. I saw the bank alerts on my secured network. He had to drain the absolute last drop of his personal emergency line of credit just to cover the final catering invoice this afternoon. He maxed out his final financial lifeline just to keep up appearances for a room full of parasites. He was standing in my dining room completely broke, celebrating a wealth he did not possess. I watched the monitor as Jamal stood up and clinked his spoon against a champagne flute, calling for the room's attention. He looked incredibly smug, adjusting his designer tie and smiling at his adoring audience. The audio feed picked up his voice perfectly. He welcomed everyone to his home. He talked about the importance of blood and legacy. He completely omitted my name from his speech. He did not mention the wife who was locked in the downstairs office recovering from major spinal surgery. He spoke about his future, about securing generational wealth for the family and taking his career to the next level. The room erupted in applause. Yvonne wiped a tear from her eye, beaming with pride. I turned the tablet off and set it gently on the desk. They were absolutely drowning in their own unearned arrogance. They felt invincible, and that was exactly what I wanted. I needed them to climb to the absolute highest peak of their delusion before I pulled the ground out from under them. The fall would be so much more devastating. I slowly stood up, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. The heavy narcotics had completely left my system by now. I wanted a clear head for what was about to happen. The throbbing ache in my lower back was severe, but I channeled that pain into raw determination. I walked over to the small mirror hanging on the back of the office door. I looked at my reflection. For years I had played the role of the quiet, accommodating spouse. I had dimmed my own light to let Jamal shine. I had tolerated Yvonne's insults and Kendrick's freeloading and Ashley's weaponized entitlement because I believed that marriage meant compromise. But this was not compromise. This was a hostile takeover. I reached up and smoothed my hair. I adjusted the thick straps of my medical brace, pulling them tight. I was not the defeated, broken woman they thought I was. I was the chief executive officer of a highly profitable agency. I was the sole legal owner of this entire estate. I had secured my encrypted drives, transferred every dime of my wealth into an untouchable corporate trust, and legally severed myself from Jamal's impending bankruptcy. My phone vibrated silently on the desk. It was a text message from Elijah, my corporate attorney. He and my business partner Zuri were exactly 5 minutes away. The private security team was pulling into the neighborhood. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air of the office. The time for hiding was officially over. I reached forward and gripped the brass handle of the office door, twisting it slowly. It was time to crash the party and serve the dessert. I pushed the heavy oak door of my office open and stepped into the hallway. The rich scent of roasted garlic and seared prime rib hung thick in the air, mocking my empty stomach. I moved slowly, placing each foot carefully on the hardwood to keep my healing spine as stable as possible. The rigid medical brace held my torso in a tight grip, but I kept my head high. I walked toward the formal dining room where the noise was the loudest, letting the sheer audacity of my husband and his relatives fuel my every step. When I reached the wide arched doorway, I stopped and took in the scene. My custom-imported marble dining table was completely surrounded. All 13 members of Jamal's family were packed into the room, eating off my fine china and drinking from my crystal glasses. The catered spread was wildly extravagant. Thick cuts of expensive meat-buttered lobster tails and gourmet side dishes covered every single inch of available space. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense for his grand illusion, maximizing the final drops of the credit limit I was about to obliterate. My eyes immediately locked onto Ashley. She was sitting near the center of the table, laughing loudly with a mouthful of food. Draped casually over her shoulders was an emerald green silk shawl. I recognized it instantly. It was my emerald green silk shawl. I had purchased it at a luxury boutique in Paris 2 years ago to celebrate signing my first major corporate tech contract. She had brazenly walked into my master bedroom, dug through my personal closet, and simply taken it. She wore it like a trophy, a symbol of her completely unearned white entitlement in my home. No one noticed me standing in the doorway at first. They were too busy indulging in the feast and talking over one another. Then Jamal caught my eye from his seat at the head of the table. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit jacket, looking exactly like a wealthy patriarch holding court. When he saw me standing there in my medical gear, a slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He thought I had finally crawled out of my downstairs cave to surrender. He thought the sheer volume of his family and the extravagant display of his supposed wealth had finally broken my spirit. He leaned back in his leather dining chair and casually tapped his silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the loud chatter, and the room quickly fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Jamal, and then they followed his gaze and saw me. A few of his younger cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the tension, but Ashley just offered a smug little smile and took another long sip of my wine. Yvonne stood up at the opposite end of the table. She smoothed down her sequined evening dress and raised her glass high into the air. She looked directly at her son, her eyes shining with absolute blind adoration. She was completely intoxicated by the fake reality he had built for her. "I want to propose a toast," Yvonne announced, her voice booming through the dining room with deep theatrical emotion. "To my wonderful son, Jamal. You have always been the absolute shining star of this family. Look at this beautiful home you have provided for us. Look at this incredible feast you have laid out on this table. You are a true king, providing for your people, taking care of your brother Kendrick, and ensuring that your mother never has to worry about a single thing in this world." She paused and cast a cold, disdainful glance in my direction. She looked at my swollen face and my rigid posture with nothing but pure contempt. "It takes a very strong man to carry the weight of an entire household on his shoulders," she continued, her voice dripping with venom, "especially when he has to manage a household all by himself without the support of a proper wife. A lesser man would have crumbled under the burden of taking care of someone so fragile and so incredibly ungrateful. But not my Jamal. He does not complain. He just works harder. He is the true savior of this family, and we are so blessed to have him as our foundation." The table erupted in loud applause. Kendrick raised his glass of my top-shelf bourbon and shouted his loud agreement, thumping his hand on the marble table. Ashley clapped her hands together enthusiastically, the emerald silk of my stolen shawl slipping carelessly off one shoulder. I watched Jamal soak in the adulation. He looked like a man who had just conquered the entire world. He raised his own glass, accepting the praise with a perfectly practiced look of humble nobility. He locked eyes with me again, and this time his gaze was filled with a mixture of profound pity and absolute triumph. In his mind, he had already won the war. He believed I had signed away my equity in a drug-induced haze. He believed he was pulling $500,000 out of my house next week to fund his brother's delusions. He believed he was going to hand me divorce papers, move his young mistress into my master bedroom, and leave me physically and financially destitute. He was looking at me like I was a ghost haunting a house I no longer owned. He thought I was standing there realizing that I had been completely replaced and outsmarted. I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I did not let a single ounce of emotion show on my face. I just stood there in the doorway, letting them bask in the absolute peak of their collective delusion. I wanted them to feel 10 feet tall. I wanted them to feel utterly invincible because the impact of hitting the pavement would shatter them so much more completely. Jamal opened his mouth, preparing to give his own speech to officially cement his fake legacy in front of his captive audience. He took a deep breath, ready to play the benevolent provider one last time. But before he could even utter a single syllable, a sharp, piercing sound echoed through the grand foyer. The heavy brass doorbell rang out, interrupting the perfect moment. Jamal frowned, his annoyance visible as he set his champagne flute down. He assumed it was a late delivery from the catering company with the final dessert course. He had absolutely no idea that his entire fraudulent life was waiting right on the other side of that door. I stepped out of the shadows of the hallway, just as Jamal pulled the heavy front double doors open. A rush of warm evening air swept into the foyer, but it did nothing to thaw the absolute ice running through my veins. I stood silently near the archway of the dining room, where the rest of his family was still buzzing from Yvonne's ridiculous speech. They were completely unaware that the atmosphere was about to change permanently. Jamal stood in the doorway, his fake smile instantly dropping when he realized the catering company was not standing on our porch. Standing under the bright glow of the exterior lights were the two people I trusted most in this world. Zuri was wearing a razor-sharp crimson blazer, her braids pulled up into a flawless high crown, looking every bit the ruthless agency co-founder she was. She was holding a stack of thick manila envelopes, tucked securely under her arm. Right beside her stood Elijah, my corporate attorney. Elijah was a man who commanded any room he entered. He was wearing a dark, bespoke suit and holding his sleek leather briefcase with the quiet, terrifying confidence of a man who held all the winning cards. "Can I help you?" Jamal asked, his voice dripping with immediate hostility. He puffed his chest out, trying to use his physical size to intimidate them. "We are in the middle of a private family dinner. We are not accepting solicitors tonight." He reached out to slam the heavy wood door in their faces, but Elijah calmly extended one hand and caught the edge, stopping it completely. Elijah did not even blink. "We are not solicitors," Jamal Elijah said, his voice deep and smooth. "We are here to see Simone. It is a matter of urgent legal and financial importance." Jamal let out a loud, arrogant scoff. He turned his head, looking over his shoulder toward the dining room to make sure his audience was watching him defend his castle. "My wife is recovering from surgery and she is resting," he lied smoothly, projecting his voice for his mother's benefit. "I am the head of this household. Whatever business you have with her, you can run it through me. But right now, you are interrupting a private family success dinner. I am going to ask you outsiders to step off my property before I call the police and have you removed for ruining our family time." The sheer irony of him threatening to call the police to protect a house he was actively trying to steal was almost too delicious to interrupt. But my cue had finally arrived. I took a slow, deliberate step out of the shadows and into the bright light of the crystal chandelier hanging in the foyer. The rigid plastic of my medical brace creaked slightly in the quiet space, drawing everyone's attention. "They do not need to speak with you, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing out clear and cold across the marble floors. "They are here exactly as I requested." Jamal spun around, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he saw me standing there. The loud, joyful conversation in the dining room died instantly. Yvonne lowered her glass of champagne, her mouth falling open. Kendrick stopped mid-laugh, setting his bourbon down on the table. Ashley sat completely frozen, with my stolen emerald shawl slipping carelessly off her shoulder. They all stared at me like a ghost had just walked into the middle of their extravagant banquet. "Simone, what are you doing out of bed?" Jamal hissed, taking a quick step toward me. His tone was a frantic mixture of warning and panic. He reached his hand out, trying to grab my arm to usher me back into the hallway and out of sight. "You are making a scene in front of my mother. Get back to the office before you embarrass us both." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at his hand reaching for me and gave him a glare so absolutely lethal that he froze mid-step. I slowly reached up to the top straps of my cumbersome medical brace. The loud tearing sound of the Velcro undoing echoed in the dead silent foyer. I unbuckled the straps one by one, letting the rigid plastic loosen its grip on my healing torso. I ignored the sharp, sudden flare of pain at the base of my spine. The pure adrenaline pumping through my system was a far better painkiller than anything the pharmacy had prescribed. I pulled my shoulders back and straightened my posture completely. I stood up to my full height, looking my deceitful husband dead in the eyes. I was no longer the hunched-over medicated victim he had locked away in a cramped room. I was the master of this estate, and it was finally time to clean house. "Let them in, Jamal," I commanded, my voice dropping to a terrifying, icy authority that left absolutely no room for debate. Jamal opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He looked at my face and finally saw the absolute lack of submission. He realized in that split second that the obedient wife he thought he controlled was gone forever. He looked back at Zuri, who was offering him a smile that looked much more like a threat. And he looked at Elijah, who was already stepping over the threshold uninvited, pushing the front doors wide open. "What is going on here?" Yvonne demanded from the dining room table, her voice shrill with indignation. "Jamal, tell these people to leave our house immediately. We are trying to celebrate you." I walked past Jamal, brushing my shoulder against his custom suit jacket. I moved toward the dining room table, locking eyes with my mother-in-law. I offered her a slow, chilling smile that made her shrink back into her leather chair. "Oh, nobody is leaving yet, Yvonne," I said, projecting my voice so every single parasite in the room could hear me perfectly. "The celebration is just getting started. I suggest you all keep your seats and clear a space on your plates." Jamal practically stumbled into the dining room behind me, his face pale with rising panic. "Simone, what is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling as he realized he had completely lost control of the narrative. "What did they bring here?" I turned to face him, letting my eyes sweep over the 13 relatives who were staring at me in terrified silence. "Let them in, Jamal," I repeated softly, letting the finality of the moment sink deep into his bones. They brought the dessert. I walked past Jamal, leaving him frozen in the foyer, and led Elijah and Zuri straight into the formal dining room. The loud, obnoxious energy that had filled the room just moments ago was completely gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. Yvonne stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Kendrick and Ashley looked like deer caught in headlights. They were all staring at the woman they thought they had broken, who was now standing tall without her medical brace, flanked by 2 corporate sharks. I walked over to my end of the long marble table. I picked up a crystal champagne flute and a silver spoon. I tapped the glass 3 times. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the heavy air, demanding absolute attention. I smiled a cold, empty smile. I told them I wanted to thank them all for coming to my home. I said since Jamal had given such a moving speech about his future and his role as the great provider, I thought it was only fitting to bring out a few special gifts to celebrate his impending new chapter. I nodded to Zuri. She did not say a single word. She simply unclasped her designer briefcase and pulled out 4 thick manila envelopes. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor as she walked around the table, systematically sliding one envelope in front of Jamal, who had stumbled back into the room. She placed the next one in front of Yvonne, then one for Kendrick, and a final one for Ashley. Jamal looked down at the heavy envelope bearing his name. A brief flicker of hope crossed his panicked face. His arrogant brain was desperately trying to convince him that these were the finalized equity loan documents. He thought I was just putting on a dramatic show to hand over the cash he needed to save face in front of his family. His greed overrode his common sense. He practically ripped the seal open, pulling out the thick stack of premium legal paper. I watched his eyes scan the bold printed words on the very first page. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. The divorce papers had been drafted flawlessly by Elijah, outlining my demand for a clean, immediate break. Jamal's hands started to tremble. The smug, confident mask he wore so well began to violently slip. He quickly flipped to the next document, expecting to at least find the signed quitclaim deed that would guarantee his financial safety net. He pulled out the deed and stared at it, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He flipped the page over, and then flipped it back, frantically searching for my signature on the bottom line. I asked him if he liked my favorite blue pen. He snapped his head up to look at me, pure confusion radiating from his eyes. I told him the pen he handed me in the office was a highly specialized architectural drafting tool. I explained that the vibrant blue ink is chemically formulated to completely evaporate when exposed to room temperature air for 24 hours. I watched the color drain entirely from his face as he stared at the completely blank signature line. He realized in real time that the legal document he thought secured his fraudulent wealth was nothing but a useless piece of blank paper. I had never surrendered a single dime of my equity, but I was not done destroying him. I told him to look at the very last document in his stack. His shaking fingers pulled out a series of printed pages. It was a word-for-word transcription of the phone call he made on my patio last night. I read the highlights out loud for the entire dining room to hear. I quoted his exact words to his young mistress, promising her that he was going to throw his disabled wife onto the street and move her into my $2.5 million mansion by next month. I read the part where he laughed about manipulating me while I was heavily medicated. The dining room erupted in chaos. Yvonne gasped, clutching her chest as the illusion of her perfect, faithful son shattered in front of her eyes. Ashley and Kendrick looked at Jamal in sheer horror, realizing that his grand master plan to fund their lifestyle was built on a foundation of absolute lies and had just spectacularly failed. Jamal looked up from the papers, his face contorted in a mixture of pure terror and blinding rage. The realization that he had been completely outplayed, outsmarted, and outmaneuvered by the woman he thought he controlled finally broke him. He opened his mouth to scream, but he had absolutely no defense. His entire fraudulent life was laid out on the marble table for everyone to see, and the execution was just getting started. I turned my attention away from my hyperventilating husband and locked eyes with my mother-in-law. Yvonne was clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and ragged as she watched her golden boy crumble into a pathetic, trembling mess. She looked down at the thick manila envelope resting on the marble table directly in front of her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely lift the flap. "Open it, Yvonne!" I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You just gave a beautiful speech about the king of this castle. Let us take a look at the royal treasury." She pulled out a massive stack of financial documents. Zuri had meticulously organized them chronologically, complete, with highlighted bank transfer confirmation numbers. Yvonne stared at the first page, her brow furrowing in confusion as she tried to make sense of the corporate letterhead and the long columns of numbers. I decided to help her understand. I walked slowly down the length of the dining table, my posture absolutely perfect. I told her she was holding the itemized receipts of her entire life over the last 5 years. I pointed to the first stack and told her those were the medical bills for her total knee replacement 2 years ago. I reminded her how Jamal had bragged about cashing in his massive corporate bonus to cover the $60,000 out-of-pocket expense so she could have the best private hospital suite in Atlanta. I watched her eyes scan the highlighted lines. I told her Jamal did not pay a single dime toward that surgery. The payment came directly from a corporate healthcare account funded exclusively by my user experience design agency. I paid for the surgery. I paid for the 6 months of premium physical therapy. I even paid the valet tip at the hospital. Yvonne's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She flipped to the next page, her hands trembling violently. I did not stop there. I pointed to the next section and told her to look at her church donations. Yvonne loved to play the generous matriarch at her congregation, dropping heavy checks into the offering plate every single Sunday to maintain her status among her friends. She always told everyone her successful son was blessing her with the funds. I revealed that every single one of those checks was drawn from a joint account that I solely funded. I told her that the designer suits Jamal wore to church, the least luxury sedan he drove her around in, and the very food she was chewing on right now were all paid for by the black woman she had spent 5 years treating like garbage. "You called him a provider, Yvonne," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that cut through the dead silent room. "He has never provided a single thing for you. I am your provider. I am your savior. And as of yesterday, your free ride has been permanently canceled." Yvonne dropped the papers onto her plate of prime rib. She looked at Jamal, desperate for him to deny it, desperate for him to tell her it was a lie. But Jamal could not even look his mother in the eye. He stared down at his blank quitclaim deed. his silence confirming every single word I had just spoken. The grand illusion of her perfect, successful son violently shattered right in front of the entire extended family. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a quiet, devastated sob as the reality of her own arrogance finally crushed her. I did not have an ounce of pity for her. I immediately turned my gaze across the table to Kendrick and Ashley. Ashley had gone completely pale. The stolen emerald green silk shawl was slipping off her shoulders, and she was no longer chewing her food. Kendrick was staring at his own envelope like it was an active, explosive device. "Go ahead, Kendrick," I said, gesturing to the envelope. "Do not be shy." Kendrick swallowed hard and ripped the envelope open. He pulled out a sleek folder bearing the logo of a commercial debt acquisition firm. Ashley leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. It only took her about 5 seconds to realize exactly what she was looking at. A sharp, panicked gasp escaped her lips. Ashley loved to brag about her trendy suburban boutique. She used it as her ultimate status symbol, a weapon to prove her superiority in our family dynamic. When the boutique was on the verge of total bankruptcy last October, Jamal told her he was using his personal investments to bail her out. He gave her $40,000 to pay off her aggressive wholesale vendors and keep the eviction notices off her storefront windows. Ashley had gladly taken the money while continuing to disrespect me in my own home because she thought she was untouchable. I looked at her terrified face and smiled. I told Ashley that her boutique was bleeding money because she was a terrible business owner with no sense of inventory management. I explained that Jamal did not give her a gift. He gave her a loan using my money behind my back. "But I am a much better investor than my husband," I said, walking right up to Ashley's chair. I told her that earlier this week, while she was busy pouring red wine on my laptop and throwing away my groceries, Zuri and I were busy making corporate moves. I explained that we had used a subsidiary limited liability company to quietly buy out the remaining debts she owed to her commercial landlord and her primary distributors. We bought her debt for pennies on the dollar. Kendrick stared at the paperwork, his hands shaking. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice cracking with fear. Elijah stepped forward from the archway, adjusting his suit jacket. He spoke with the cold, clinical precision of a seasoned litigator. "It means my client is now your primary creditor," he explained smoothly. "And according to the terms of your original agreements, which we now hold, those debts contain a universal default clause. Due to your ongoing insolvency, my client is calling the loan completely due." I looked back down at Ashley. "I am demanding immediate repayment in full," I told her. "You owe me $120,000, Ashley. And since I know for a fact you do not have it, this paperwork also serves as your official notice of immediate foreclosure. I am seizing your storefront. I am seizing your inventory. Your boutique belongs to me now." Ashley let out a loud, hysterical sob. She practically jumped out of her chair, knocking her crystal wine glass onto the marble floor where it shattered into 100 pieces. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at my face, her white fragility fully activated. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are destroying my life. Jamal, you promised me that business was safe. Do something. Tell her she cannot do this." Kendrick turned to his brother, his eyes wide with panic. "Jamal, fix this," Kendrick pleaded. "You said you had the money. You said you were pulling equity from the house. Pay her off." But Jamal had absolutely nothing to say. He was backed into a corner of his own making, surrounded by the very people he had lied to for years. He had no equity. He had no hidden wealth. He did not even have the money to pay for the catered food sitting in front of them. He was a complete and total fraud, and I had just stripped away every single layer of his disguise in front of the audience he valued most. The entire dining room was paralyzed in a state of absolute shock. The other relatives who had come for a free luxury vacation sat perfectly still, terrified to even breathe loud enough to draw my attention. They were witnessing the systematic financial execution of their golden boy and his favorite dependents. I looked at the three of them, Jamal, Yvonne, and Ashley. They had invaded my sanctuary, disrespected my healing body, and plotted to steal my wealth. They thought my kindness was a weakness they could exploit. They were learning the hard way that my silence was never submission. It was simply the time I needed to load the weapon. Jamal slammed his hands flat against the imported marble table, sending silverware clattering. The quiet murmurs of his terrified relatives died instantly as he let out a guttural scream of pure rage. The facade of the charming, wealthy patriarch melted away completely, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face and shouted that I could not do this to him. He screamed that we were legally married and under state law, he was entitled to half of everything I had ever built. He threatened to drag my name through the mud in family court. He vowed to take half of my tech agency and force the immediate sale of this $2.5 million house. He yelled that he would leave me with absolutely nothing but the medical brace on my back. I did not even blink. I just looked at him with cold amusement. Elijah smoothly unbuttoned his custom suit jacket and took a single step forward, standing between me and my hyperventilating husband. Elijah was cool, collected, and operated with the surgical precision of an apex predator. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a slim document folder. He placed it gently on the table right on top of Jamal's useless blank quitclaim deed. Elijah spoke with a calm, soothing voice that only made the situation more terrifying. He told Jamal to look at the date printed on the very first page. It was our prenuptial agreement. I had insisted on drafting it 8 years ago, when my tech agency was just starting to scale. Jamal had signed it without even bothering to hire his own legal counsel, because he was too arrogant and too eager to lock down a woman with a rapidly rising income. He had skimmed the pages, assuming standard marital laws would eventually override whatever paperwork I put in front of him. Elijah explained the exact terms out loud, ensuring every single person in the dining room heard the absolute finality of Jamal's ruin. The agreement explicitly stated that any business entities formed by either party before or during the marriage remained sole and separate property in perpetuity. It also included an aggressively severe penalty clause for financial infidelity, which Jamal had thoroughly triggered by hiding maxed-out credit cards and secretly funneling our joint savings to his brother Kendrick. Jamal sputtered, his eyes darting frantically between Elijah and the heavy legal document. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his chest heaved. He stammered that the house was different. He claimed he had lived here and contributed to the household maintenance, so he was legally entitled to half the equity regardless of my business assets. Elijah let out a soft, chilling laugh. He adjusted his glasses and informed Jamal that I did not personally own the mansion we were currently standing in. He explained that 3 years ago, when I purchased the property, I had Elijah and Zuri set up an anonymous corporate real estate trust. My tech agency owned the corporate trust, and the trust legally owned the house. Jamal was effectively just a long-term guest living inside a corporate asset. He had absolutely zero legal claim to a single brick of the property. He was leaving this marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which was absolutely nothing. The totality of Jamal's defeat settled over the dining room like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Yvonne was weeping silently into her napkin. Kendrick was staring blankly at the wall, realizing his free ride was permanently over. But Ashley could not accept that her unearned lifestyle was going up in flames. She was losing her boutique, her fake wealthy status, and her comfortable position of privilege all in one night. She decided to use her favorite weapon. She burst into loud, dramatic sobs, burying her face in her hands, expecting the room to rush to her side. When nobody moved to comfort her, the fake tears instantly turned to vicious rage. She jumped out of her chair, her face flushed bright red with unearned outrage. She grabbed the stem of her crystal wine glass and glared at me with pure venom. She screamed that I was a bitter, aggressive woman who was destroying a beautiful family out of pure spite. She cried that I was hateful and cold, and that Jamal was perfectly justified in looking for a younger, softer woman to treat him right. Then she reared her arm back and violently hurled the heavy crystal glass directly at my face. But the glass never reached me. Before the crystal could even shatter against the floor, the heavy double doors leading to the kitchen swung violently open. 4 burly private security guards stepped into the dining room. They were dressed in uniform tactical gear, their faces completely unreadable, and their hands resting firmly near their utility belts. The sudden, imposing arrival of armed security instantly silenced Ashley's hysterical screaming. The crystal glass hit the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, but nobody even flinched. They were all staring at the guards in absolute terror. I looked at the four shocked faces of the parasites who had invaded my sanctuary. I smiled, letting my voice drop to a lethal whisper that commanded absolute obedience. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your bags and vacate my property, or every single one of you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. The lead security guard, a towering man with a completely unreadable expression, stepped forward and tapped the face of his tactical watch. He announced to the dining room that they now had exactly 29 minutes left. The absolute sheer panic that erupted in that dining room was like a symphony to my ears. The arrogant laughter and the drunken bravado evaporated into thin air. Chairs scraped violently against the marble floor as 13 people scrambled to their feet. The younger cousins, who had been running wild just moments ago, burst into confused tears. Kendrick dropped his glass of my top-shelf bourbon, and it spilled across the table, soaking into the expensive linens. He did not even bother to wipe it up. He just grabbed his wife by the arm and started pulling her toward the grand staircase. Ashley was sobbing hysterically now, but nobody was paying attention to her white tears anymore. She tried to clutch my emerald green silk shawl tightly around her shoulders as she ran toward the stairs, but one of the security guards immediately stepped directly into her path. He did not say a word. He just pointed a firm, gloved finger at the shawl. Ashley let out a humiliated gasp, her face turning bright red as she yanked the expensive fabric off her body and dropped it onto the floor. She ran up the stairs barefoot, leaving her dignity completely shattered in the foyer. Yvonne was the last of the relatives to move. She stood at the head of the table, gripping the back of her chair, her knuckles completely white. She looked at me, and for the first time in the 5 years I had known her, she looked incredibly small. The grandiose matriarch who had spent the entire week mocking my lack of children and my domestic skills was gone. She was just an old woman who realized her favorite son was a complete and total fraud. She opened her mouth to say something to me, but Elijah simply gestured toward the hallway, indicating that her time was ticking down. Yvonne lowered her head, avoiding my eyes entirely, and shuffled slowly out of the dining room, her sequined evening gown suddenly looking ridiculous and cheap. While the rest of the house sounded like a frantic, chaotic stampede, Jamal remained perfectly still. He was standing near the edge of the dining room, completely paralyzed by the reality of his situation. He watched his entire family flee from the table. He watched the private security team fan out across the main floor, ensuring no one tried to take a single item that did not belong to them. Then Jamal slowly turned his gaze back to me. The arrogant smirk, the tailored suit, the polished salesman persona, all of it was completely gone. He was looking at a woman he did not even recognize. He realized in that exact moment that the mistress he had promised this mansion to was going to leave him the second she found out he was broke. He realized the luxury car he loved to parade around Atlanta was going to be repossessed because I had pulled my guarantor status. He realized he had no equity, no savings, no home, and absolutely no future. Jamal took 2 trembling steps toward me, and his knees physically gave out. He dropped hard onto the imported marble floor, landing right beside the shattered remains of Ashley's crystal wine glass. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his hands clasped together in front of his chest. He abandoned every single ounce of his pride and began to beg, "Simone, please." He choked out, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Baby, please do not do this to me. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I got caught up in the pressure. I just wanted my mother to be proud of me. I just wanted to provide for my brother. You know how much pressure they put on me. I love you, Simone. We can fix this. I will cancel the divorce. I will go to counseling. Just tell the guards to leave. Please do not throw me out on the street." I looked down at the man I had married. I looked at the man who had stolen my money to fund his vanity, who had mocked my career, who had locked me in a cramped office while my spine was healing, and who had laughed on my patio while promising my home to another woman. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I did not feel an ounce of sadness. My heart was completely shielded by the absolute certainty of my own worth. "I am not your baby, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly steady and ice-cold. "And you are not a provider. You are a parasite, and your free ride expired exactly 20 minutes ago. You need to go upstairs and pack your custom suits before my guards physically throw you out the front door empty-handed." I turned my back on him. I did not wait to see his reaction. I simply walked away, my posture perfectly straight, the medical brace no longer feeling like a cage, but like a piece of armor. I walked into the kitchen with Zuri and Elijah, pouring myself a glass of cold water and letting the chaotic sounds of the exodus wash over me. 10 minutes later, the heavy thud of suitcases bouncing down my grand staircase echoed through the house. The security team escorted all 13 members of Jamal's family out the front door. I watched through the kitchen monitors as they stood in my driveway dragging their cheap luggage, looking completely lost. Jamal walked out last, his head hung in absolute shame, his mother refusing to even stand next to him. The lead security guard pulled the heavy oak double doors shut. The solid, heavy click of the deadbolt locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. 6 months passed, and the dust of my old life completely settled, leaving behind a beautifully clear horizon. The consequences of that Friday night rippled through Jamal's life with absolutely devastating precision. Jamal is currently drowning in over $100,000 of high-interest consumer debt. Because I had legally severed myself from all his accounts before the confrontation, the credit card companies went after him with a vengeance. His leased luxury sedan was repossessed in the middle of the night directly from the parking lot of the cramped two-bedroom apartment he was forced to rent out by the highway. He does not live in that cheap apartment alone. Yvonne had nowhere else to go, so she moved in with him. From what mutual acquaintances have told me, their relationship is completely toxic. Yvonne berates him daily, constantly reminding him of the public humiliation she suffered and the comfortable life he threw away. She no longer calls him the king of the castle. She just calls him a disappointment. As for the younger woman from the patio phone call, she blocked his number the exact same day he showed up at her apartment with a trash bag full of clothes and zero access to my bank accounts. She was looking for a millionaire, not a homeless salesman with a ruined credit score. Kendrick and Ashley met an equally satisfying fate. The commercial debt acquisition firm my corporate entity used to buy out their boutique loans did not show them a single ounce of mercy. I ordered the immediate liquidation of their business. The storefront was foreclosed on, the locks were changed, and every single piece of their inventory was seized and sold at auction to cover their massive defaults. Ashley is currently working retail for minimum wage at a local mall, folding clothes for the exact same country club women she used to brag to. Those women completely ignore her now. Kendrick is facing wage garnishment for the remaining balance of the debt, though considering his chronic unemployment, the collection agencies will be chasing him for the rest of his natural life. They lost their fake wealth, their social status, and their unearned arrogance all in one sweeping motion. As for me, I am currently standing in the grand foyer of my $2.5 million mansion, and it is completely perfectly silent. My spine has fully healed, the titanium screws set perfectly, and the physical therapy restored my mobility completely. I no longer wear the rigid plastic brace. I walk with the effortless grace of a woman who carries absolutely no dead weight on her shoulders. There are no dirty shoe prints on my custom-imported rugs. There are no loud, obnoxious voices echoing off my high ceilings. There is only peace. My tech agency has tripled its revenue over the last 2 quarters. Zuri and I just returned from a trip to London where we finalized a massive international user experience contract that will secure our corporate empire for the next decade. We celebrated by opening a bottle of vintage red wine, the exact same vintage Ashley tried to use to destroy my laptop. I poured myself a glass and walked out onto my custom stone patio. I sat in the teak furniture listening to the quiet ambient sounds of the Atlanta evening. I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who dimmed her own light, who hid her massive income, who swallowed disrespect just to keep the peace in a marriage that was fundamentally broken. I thought about the moment I realized my husband was trying to steal my home while I was heavily medicated and vulnerable. I took a slow sip of the expensive wine, letting the rich flavor settle. I realized that my greatest asset was never my bank account. It was never the millions of dollars in my corporate trust or the deed to this beautiful mansion. My greatest asset was my unshakable independence. It was my brilliant mind. It was my ability to endure the pain, observe the enemy, and strike back with absolute lethal precision exactly when they thought I was already defeated. Jamal and his family thought they could invade my sanctuary and break me down. Instead, they handed me the exact tools I needed to cut them out of my life like a toxic infection. I did not just survive their betrayal. I completely neutralized it and built a fortress they will never be able to breach again. Have you ever had to reclaim your peace from people who mistook your kindness for weakness? Have you ever had to show a parasitic partner exactly who holds the power? Share your stories in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about building your empire and protecting your peace. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your greatest comeback always begins the moment you decide you are done playing the victim. The greatest lesson I learned from this ordeal is that your independence is your ultimate shield. For years, I dimmed my light and hid my success to protect a fragile man who only saw me as a resource to be exploited. I thought compromising my boundaries was the price of keeping a marriage together. But true love does not ask you to shrink yourself or endure disrespect when you are most vulnerable. Reclaiming your peace means cutting off the parasites who drain your energy and unapologetically standing in your own power. Never be afraid to protect what you built. If you have ever had to reclaim your power from toxic people, let me know your story in the comments, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content about protecting your peace.